Hello, today I'm going to be talking about how to cook a perfect steak. So to start off, you're going to want to make sure that your steak knife that you're going to be cutting your steak with is extra sharp. So here I have the Smith's adjustable angle knife sharpener, and I'm just going to run my knife through a few times just to make sure that it's extra sharp so I'm not going to crush my meat at all when I'm cutting it. Make sure after you sharpen your knife, you're washing it off so you don't get any of those metal filaments on your knife. Then you can start cooking your steak. So first thing you want to do is you want to identify what kind of meat you want to use. So for instance, today I'm using beef petite sirloin steak from Winco. And when you're shopping for your steak, you want to pick out the steak that it looks like has the least fat. So I did a decent job picking out this piece of steak. There's just a few pockets of fat on it. But the first thing you're going to want to do is take your fork and hold your steak and then get your knife and kind of cut off that fatty area. Now you want to make sure when you're cutting off the fatty area that you're not taking off too much of the meat, that you're just taking off the actual fat part of the steak. So just scrape that aside on your cutting board. Make sure it doesn't get in the way. If you have to do multiple cuts instead of just one cut all the way around, that's fine. You're trying to get as detailed as you can, get as much of the fat off without losing any actual steak. So here we go, I'm going to cut around that large piece right there. And then you're going to want to do the same thing on the opposite side. Just cut off that part right there. And then try and get some of this top fat off. Just to make sure that your steak is going to be as high quality as possible and not filled with a bunch of fat. The better steak you buy, the less fat it will have on it. However, with just the grocery store brand, you're probably going to have a lot of fat that you have to get off of your steak before you go anywhere with it. So once you have most of the fat cut off, you're just going to want to take your fat and just go ahead and throw it away. So the next step with this is going to be drying off your steak. Now, this might seem like a weird step, but it's actually very important to dry off your steak because if your steak is too moist, you're going to lose some of the tenderness in your meat. So you're just going to take a regular paper towel and just start dabbing off the juices from your steak. Make sure you get the sides and the top evenly. And as you see, there's a lot of grease coming off that steak, and that's something you don't want once you throw it into the pan. Then you're going to flip again and do the same thing on the other side. I see I missed a little bit of fat right here, so I'm going to just go ahead and cut that off. You're also going to want to make sure you have your hands washed for this part. Once you actually start touching the meat, it's important that you have clean hands. Okay, next up is seasoning your steak. So you want to make sure that the time in between throwing your steak actually into the pot and the time that you're seasoning is very little, because the more time you let that seasoning sit on that steak, it's the more juices that are being drawn out of the steak, and it's getting drier and drier. So I'm going to use some Himalayan pink salt and just give it a generous amount of salt all over your meat. Then you're going to want to kind of pat it in to make sure it really gets the salt into the grooves of the meat. Then you're going to want to flip and do the exact same thing on the other side. Then you're going to want to make a little separate pile on the side of your cutting board. And after you pat in it on top, you're going to want to kind of drag the sides of the steak through it. So make sure you're getting even coverage of salt throughout the steak. And then you're going to want to take some ground black pepper and do the exact same thing. All over the steak, pat it in. All over the other side. Little pile, and to the side. The next process that I'm going to be doing, I'm not saying you should do this, but I have a smaller griddle, so I'm going to go ahead and cut my steak exactly in half, so that I have two smaller pieces instead of one larger piece. Also, if you look at I'm doing it because if you look at the thickness of my steak, it's a very different thickness, so I want to make sure that I'm not overdoing one side while undercooking the other side. So let's move on to our next step. So you're going to want to go ahead and take extra virgin olive oil. You're going to want to take 2 tablespoons of that. 1.5 to 2 tablespoons. Just enough to cover the entire bottom of your pan in a slight layer of olive oil. Once you've done that, you're going to want to kind of take your pan and spread that oil all over the bottom. So make sure you have even coverage. Sometimes if you have a bigger pan like I do, I'm going to go ahead and do 3 teaspoons because 2 teaspoons isn't quite enough to cover the entire bottom of the pan. Okay, there we go. Then next step, you're going to take a tablespoon of butter. Most butter has a little notch on here that will show you what 1 tablespoon teaspoon is. So you're going to want to go ahead and probably use a different knife than the knife you've been using to cut your raw meat. And you're just going to want to go ahead and get about 3/4 to a full tablespoon of butter and cut that off. Then you're going to want to take that, unwrap it, make sure all the paper's off. You don't want any paper in your steak. And then you're going to go ahead and throw that straight into the pan. So then next for the heat, you're going to want to do about half to high half of the potential of your grill. So I will come back right when this is warmed up. All right, and we're back. Right when your olive oil butter mix kind of starts bubbling a little bit and you're starting to hear that little snap, crackle, pop sound, that's when you know that it is ready to throw the steak on. So I'm going to take some just regular salad tongs. I'm going to go ahead and put my first steak in like that. Make sure it's got good oil coverage, so if you have to swirl it around a little bit, go ahead and do that. Then I'm going to take my other steak and do the same thing on the other side. Swirl it around, make sure that's good coverage. Then you're going to set your timer for 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And we'll jump back in when that timer is over. Okay, it's been about 3 minutes, and now it's time to flip the steaks around. Now, don't worry if it looks a little bit undercooked on the side that you're flipping, because we are going to revisit this side once we are in the next portion of the recipe. So, you look at that nice golden brown texture. That's exactly what you want right there. And go ahead and flip it around and put it down. So as you can see, it's not completely cooked on this piece, but you know, we're going to revisit the side like I said, so we don't have to worry about any of that. So we're going to go ahead and do the exact same thing with the other one. Go ahead and flip it around. If you're looking at the exact same texture, which is good, that means that we're not going to have to cook our steaks unevenly. A little bit subtle flipping this around. Okay, then you're going to put the timer on for another 3 minutes until that side is completely cooked. Alright, it's been about 3 minutes, and now it's time to flip the steaks once again. And now, instead of going for time, we're going for temperature. So make sure that you have a kitchen thermometer on hand, and the temperature you're going for is around 155 to 160 degrees, and that is for medium rare steak. So I'm going to go ahead and flip these, and I'll catch you back when our steaks are done cooking. So now we are all done. It has hit 170 degrees. We are perfectly perfect. So then you're going to take a dinner plate and go ahead and put your steaks right onto said dinner plate. And that's where the cooking part of the process ends. There we go. We just cut open our steak, and it's perfectly cooked. We got a little bit of cooked meat right around, sandwich with a little bit of pink in the middle. Perfect.